Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Clerk will call attendance.
Councilor Vido,
Present.
Councilor Lopez, Councilor Rodriguez, Councilor Brown, Councilor Bishop, Councilor Tahada, Councilor Avellaneda, Councilor Robinson, Councilor Perlatonda, Councilor Garcia, and Councilor Ray Recupero. School Committee. Frank DePato, Rosemary Carlisle, Jeanette Velez, Richard Baranski, Lucia Enriquez, Julio Hernandez, Anna Hernandez, Kelly Garcia, and Yoshina Alfaro Alvarez. The call of the meeting, please be advised that Damali Vido, President of the Chelsea City Council, has called for a joint special meeting of the Chelsea City Council and Chelsea School Committee for Tuesday, May 8, 2018, at 6 p.m. in the City Council chambers. Roll call, salute to the flag, roll call of members, 5-year financial forecast is on the agenda. Officials invited to attend: Tom Ambrosino, City Manager; Ed Dunn, City Auditor; Mary Burke, Superintendent of Schools.
Okay, so just for the record, School Committee member Julio Hernandez sent me a message saying that he was at another meeting and wouldn't be able to attend tonight. So we're here for our 5-year financial forecast. Happens every year. City Manager will present. With that being said, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Madam President. So this is pretty straightforward. This presentation isn't a whole lot different from what I provided to the council last year because, as you'll see, the fundamentals haven't really changed all that much. The numbers have changed a bit, but the underlying fundamentals of our city's financial structure really are pretty much as they were a year ago. So I'll go through this presentation relatively quickly, and then I can answer some questions. So you should have the presentation in front of you. The first slide is the actual breakdown of the numbers, the projection for FY19, which those numbers are the numbers I provided you in the FY19 proposed budget, which you have before you. You can see that that proposed budget has a structural deficit of just under $800,000. That compares to last year's structural deficit of $670,000. We covered last year's deficit with free cash. I'm proposing that we do the same with this year's structural deficit. And then I project out using relatively conservative assumptions over the course of the ensuing 4 fiscal years. Each year shows a structural deficit that rises, so those are certainly of concern. And every year we try to deal with that, and I typically like to provide you with a budget that is as close to balanced as I can be, and certainly don't want to be looking for a budget that's out of balance by more than $1 million. So I obviously have some work to do in these ensuing years. So, as I said, the fundamentals really haven't changed in the last year. I'm going to go through the same positive trends that the city has and show you, in many respects, the same negative trends, with one good news exception that I'm going to get to towards the end. So, the positive trends are things that you are well aware of. We have very strong reserves. We have more money in reserves, I believe, than any municipality in the Commonwealth, with 2 exceptions, Boston and Cambridge. I think those are the only two municipalities with more reserves than the city of Chelsea. Certainly the only 2 with more free cash than the city of Chelsea has. We have a good bond rating, and we have excellent economic development opportunities. So let me just talk briefly about each of these. So you know about our reserves. We closed fiscal year 17 with certified free cash of $33.7 million. That was pretty much equivalent to what we had closed FY16 with. Notwithstanding that, we invested a lot of our free cash in FY17. Nonetheless, we closed the year and we really didn't lose any ground. We certified free cash of virtually exactly what we had certified the year before, notwithstanding all the investment that we had made. And we have retained earnings in our Water Enterprise Fund of $2.6 million and retained earnings of almost $3.7 million in our Sewer Enterprise Fund. That was as of the close of our books of June of 17. Those are the last audited numbers that we have, and so that's why that's reflected there. And at the close of 17, we had stabilization funds in addition to our free cash and retained earnings of $7.2 million. We have spent a little of this money in the course of FY18. As you know, we took $20 million of that free cash so far and put it towards stabilization, $15 million to general stabilization, $5 million to the school capital stabilization fund. We made a payment of $3 million for the new Clark Avenue Middle School. That's the last payment we have to make. That school is now paid in full. We anticipate that when we close the books on that school, we're going to end up with a surplus, maybe as much as $1 million, and whatever surplus is left in that account when the school building authority does its final reconciliation will transfer to stabilization. But we're done with the new Clark Avenue Middle School. We have spent, in addition to this, some money out of stabilization, about $1.5 million we spent in the fall, so that $7.2 million was down a little bit before we added to the amount. And then we have, so far, I've got free cash requests to you. You've approved about $300,000 or so in free cash so far of miscellaneous expenditures. I have another $300,000 before you, and I'm coming with you next week with another $1 million plus in free cash requests, and I've got some transfers as well. So in addition, the CIP demands a free cash allocation of about $5 million if you're not going to use stabilization, so that's something that you'll have to consider as well. We're still going to end this year in very good shape with a lot of strong reserves, much more money in stabilization, and so our free cash, we're not allowing all that money to fall to the bottom line, so the council should expect next year we're not going to have a large free cash number. We will have transferred a lot of our free cash to stabilization. I expect we will have some free cash, but it'll be small. It'll be in the $2 million range. It's not going to be anywhere near $33.7 million because we will have transferred a lot of it to stabilization. And I'll take any questions at the end that you have. Good bond rating. Standard & Poor's is the one bond rating entity that we utilize, and we went out to bond this year in March for the school and for some of our capital projects that were approved last spring, and they affirmed our AA rating and gave us a stable outlook. So that's a positive sign. Oh. And we have good economic development opportunities, as you know. There's a lot of developer interest in this city. The Broadway Hotel is going to open this summer. That will generate more hotel room excise tax. There's a permitted Second Street Hotel. They're still scheduled for construction in 2018. They just got an extension of their variance until August, I believe. The Chelsea Clark development is ongoing. I expect them to pull the full building permit for the first phase, which is 400 plus units, probably sometime this summer. I thought they would pull it in the spring, but they've been a little bit delayed. And then we have good opportunities on the waterfront. The Forbes folks are likely coming in with some major development this summer. 295 Eastern Ave was purchased from the owner, and that's the spot that Gentle Giant was looking at. The new owner is still talking with them, but they're going to develop that in some way, shape, or form. The Interpark site is the site just north of the Chelsea Street Bridge. That's the Park and Fly site. Those owners are interested in some development, and they have a lot of room on that site. That site is a good site for development because a large portion of that site is not in the Chapter 91 boundary, so they have a lot of land they can develop without, one, having to worry about Chapter 91, which means, two, they don't have to worry about the designated port area. Designated port area restrictions only apply to areas within the Chapter 91 boundary. So even though that parcel is within the DPA, lots of portions of it are outside both Chapter 91 and the DPA. 257 Marginal Street is the parcel on the south side of the bridge. That developer also has lots of interest in developing. His problem is he's entirely within Chapter 91 and entirely within the DPA. So he has some restrictions about what he can and cannot do, but he still is someone looking to develop. And then we have developments that are percolating because of the Silver Line. Many of you know about 170 Cottage Street, which is currently before the ZBA for approval of roughly 60-unit development at that location. You know about the Innis development, which may or may not come before you, depending upon whether they get additional funding from DHCD. And the Seidman site down here, which has had sporadic interest since the Silver Line was coming to conclusion, and it's on the market. So there have been developers looking for residential development there as well. So there's a lot of development interest in the city, just spurred by our location and spurred by the opening of the Silver Line. So those are the three positive trends: great reserves, good bond rating, real strong developer interest. That bodes well for the future for the city. As I always say, in the era of Proposition 2.5, it's economic development that keeps you going. You either develop or you die in this municipal business in Massachusetts. So what are the troubling trends, the things that sort of keep me awake at night? And the first one, which would come as no surprise to the superintendent, is minimal state aid for our school system. And that's been a troubling trend for a while. I'm just going to hit on a few highlights. Mary could speak for an hour on that, but I'm not going to let her. But let me just go through these three. So let me just hit the other one. So our pension liability, debt service increases, and our dependence on excise tax. So I'll go through each of these four quickly, but these are the things that keep me awake at night. So the school department. So the school department budget increased by $3.65 million this year. Initially we had some good news. Chapter 70 increased by approximately $3.2 million. That was, on its surface, pretty good. But the problem was that charter school tuition also increased dramatically. So that at the end of the day, the amount of additional state aid coming to the school department, much of which was eaten up by charter school tuition reimbursements, was only $1.2 million. So the state was only $2 million. Charter school tuition reimbursements ate up about $1.2 million of the $3.2 million that the state had set aside for the Chelsea public school system, which is really not fair because even though charter schools are public schools, our charter schools only educate about 8% of our children. So you can see a third of our aid went to educate 8% of our students, which is not fair. And the state knows it's not fair, but that's the system. So the balance of the school department's budgetary increase was paid by the city, $1.7 million. That's not sustainable. I say it's not sustainable because the amount of money that we can raise every year under Proposition 2.5 is $1.3 million. So if we have to give $1.7 million to the school department every year, you can see how that puts us in a bit of a bind when all of the tax increase we can go to our residents for is required to go to the school department. And that's a problem that the state has created for a variety of reasons. A major reason is the Chapter 70 formula itself doesn't work at all anymore, and Mary's been working very hard to fix that. And we're hoping that there could be a long-term fix that the Senate is looking at and may actually vote on this week, May 10th. Now, whether that passes the House and whether the governor were to sign that, that's like a 7-year fix of Chapter 70, but it would mean a lot for our school department. But then there are these particular things that, independent of the overall Chapter 70 problem, are really haunting urban systems like Chelsea. So one is that charter school reimbursements is underfunded. So I said a lot of our Chapter 70 aid was eaten up by charter tuition reimbursements. It's because there is a statutory formula for reimbursing municipalities for charter school students. It's set out in the statute. This is how much you're supposed to get repaid by the state to sort of hold you harmless as children go to a charter school. You're supposed to get reimbursed on a schedule, and there's a statutory formula, but it's been underfunded every single year by the legislature, including in FY19, where it's underfunded statewide by $76 million. And the sad thing is, legislators know it's underfunded. The problem is, when an account is underfunded by this amount of money, legislatures throw up their hands and say, there's nothing we can do about it, you have to live with it. If an account's underfunded by $1 million, usually they try to fix it, but they can't fix a $76 million problem because they don't have the money, so they say. So this isn't getting any better. I'm just telling you that it's underfunded for urban districts, and it's a problem. Further problem is the formula now is really hurting urban communities with economically disadvantaged students for two reasons. One, as you are well aware, and Mary's recounted to you many times, the state changed the way they count economically disadvantaged students. They used to count them by virtue of who qualified for free and reduced lunch. And that was a standard way to count economically disadvantaged students. It worked well. And when the state was doing that in fiscal year 16, the city of Chelsea had 5,833 economically disadvantaged students. That makes a difference because everyone knows, and the Chapter 70 formula reflects, that it costs more money to educate economically disadvantaged students. So when you identify economically disadvantaged students in your system, you are given additional money in the Chapter 70 formula to account for their needs. The state, however, in FY17 changed the way they count them. And so we dropped from 5,833 to like 4,100, a massive loss of economically disadvantaged children. As I said at a forum one time, they didn't magically elevate themselves out of poverty. They were not counted right. And so now the state has tried to do a better job of counting them. They still rely on state databases for counting economically disadvantaged children. So you have to show up in some database such as Mass Health or transitional assistance or some other state database that is geared towards providing benefits to economically disadvantaged children. The problem with that is for communities like Chelsea that have a lot of new arrivals into the country, they don't show up on a state database because they don't qualify for benefits. Even if you're documented, you aren't entitled to most benefits for 5 years. So even documented new arrivals don't show up on state database, and clearly undocumented new arrivals don't show up on state database. We have plenty of both in our system. We are required to educate them, yet the state is not counting them. The state knows it's not counting them, but hasn't come up with a fix. But right now, we are showing a count of 5,000 economically disadvantaged children. We know there are many more. There's probably at least 1,000 more, and that's hurting us because we're not getting the extra Chapter 70 money for each of those students. In fiscal year 19, that's $4,000 a student. So if we had 1,000 students, that's a lot of money. That's $4 million that we're losing out on because the state is not adequately counting our economically disadvantaged student. You can imagine what the school department could do with another $4 million. A second problem, and this is the last bullet there, is that not only are they not counting economically disadvantaged students, but they're reducing the reimbursement for them. So in just this past year, the Commonwealth reduced the reimbursement by $215 per pupil. That alone cost the city of Chelsea almost $1.1 million this year alone. So the state did a better job of counting them, but reduced the per pupil reimbursement for them. So this is a inherent problem in the Chapter 70 system and the Chapter 70 formula, which the school department is working very hard at the legislative level to resolve. I'm working hard to resolve. Urban systems are thinking about another lawsuit, like the lawsuit that originally launched the Chapter 70 education reform effort, and that may be what we end up resorting to at some point if the state doesn't fix this problem relatively soon. Superintendents are meeting on that. Mayors have been talking about it. I may come to you in the fall or earlier with a request for funds to pay for our share of a lawyer to challenge the system because it is, we believe, unconstitutional the way the state is currently funding education. It is disadvantaging urban, poor communities. So that's one troubling trend. The second one is our pension concerns. This isn't unique to Chelsea. This is a concern in every community, unfunded pension liability and unfunded OPEB liability, which is other post-employment benefits. Mostly that refers to medical costs of retirees. So our pension liability, our unfunded pension liability right now, as of 1/1/17, which is the last time the pension system was fully audited, is $81.7 million. That's the amount it would take to fully pay everyone their full pension for the rest of their life. And so our pension system is unfunded by that amount. We have a schedule to fully fund our pension system. It's a pretty aggressive schedule. Chelsea's actually on a relatively aggressive schedule compared to other municipalities. You will have paid off this unfunded liability by 2029, which is only 10 more years. That's pretty aggressive, and you're doing that by virtue of your annual appropriation. So when you see the pension number in your budget for this year, it's $8 million or so. Only $3 million, $3 million of that is really what you need to pay pension costs next year. The balance is to pay down this unfunded liability. And so that's a problem because if a recession were to happen, it becomes tougher to meet that deadline. We may have to scramble a bit. The OPEB unfunded liability is even worse. That's $192 million. That's assuming that we had to pay off, or we have to have enough money in the bank today to pay all the medical bills of all of the retirees for the rest of their life. So that's unfunded by $192 million. The city so far has set aside $1 million to pay for this, which is ridiculous, but it's something that the bond rating agencies want to see, at least you're setting aside something. The way we will ultimately pay off this unfunded liability is once we're done in 2029, hopefully, paying off the unfunded pension liability, we will turn our attention to the unfunded OPEB liability. That is the way most systems are going to deal with this unfunded liability. By 2029, you'll be contributing on an annual basis something like $14 million to pay off your unfunded pension liability. So that money will just transfer the next year to start paying off this OPEB liability, and you'll probably be on a 25-year schedule to pay that off. And that's the way I expect most cities and towns are going to handle that huge liability. Again, this is not unique to Chelsea. Everyone has this huge OPEB liability, including the state, which has a multi-billion-dollar OPEB unfunded liability. And then debt service is increasing. We are doing a lot of capital projects. They do impact our bottom line. This is projected debt service based on some anticipating capital projects in the future. This year, debt service was up $550,000. And so, look, at these projects, I advocate for them. They're worthwhile. They need to be done, and I will continue to advocate for them. The investment's necessary, but it does come at a cost. This is the one that makes me the most nervous, the city's heavy dependence on this one source of income, excise tax. This year, we are balancing our budget with the expectation that we're going to collect $12.6 million in excise tax. We will collect it. We're probably averaging somewhere in the $13, $14 million range. Last year, we collected almost $16 million in motor vehicle excise tax, but that's troublesome because it's a lot of dependence on one revenue source that is a little bit, in an industry that's a bit unsettled, with automated cars coming, with ride-hailing services. A lot of this money is generated from enterprise rental car. Who knows what's going to happen to the rental car business in the future? And so this is a little bit concerning because our guarantee from enterprise is only $5 million a year. That's what they guarantee to us by virtue of this consideration the city has given them to locate here and to utilize some city-owned property for the storage of vehicles. So that's a big gap, and it certainly makes me a little nervous. But it is what it is. That's where the city derives most of its funding. So I'll end with one success story, because this used to be in the column of troubling trends, group health insurance costs. And it's still a little bit worrisome, but we made a decision a year and a half ago that we were going to move from a premium-based system to a self-insured system. Most cities outside are self-insured. They take the risk of hoping their employees stay healthy and coming up with health insurance estimates that are conservative in the hope that you can end the year with a surplus. So we were previously on a premium payment plan with Harvard Pilgrim. They would just tell us, these are your premiums, we'll cover all the risk, whatever happens to your employees, we'll cover all the costs. We switched as of July 1, 2016 to a self-insured. What that means is we're still covered by Harvard Pilgrim, but all Harvard Pilgrim does is administer the claims for us. They help us make the payments, they make sure they go to the right places, but they don't take any of the risk. We're taking all the risk. We're setting rates with the hope that we'll collect enough money from our rates to cover all of our health insurance costs. So we were conservative the first 2 years of this plan. Excuse me. We basically said to Harvard Pilgrim, okay, tell us what the rate would be if we were on your premium plan, and that's the rate we're going to charge our employees. That's the rate we're going to pay for the first 2 years. So they gave us their premium rates that they would have charged us if we were on premium, and that's the rates we set for FY17 and for this year, FY18. And what happened was, as of March of this year, 21 months into this program, we have a surplus of just under $6 million. What that told us is Harvard Pilgrim was making a killing on the city. because this would have been $6 million of profit to Harvard Pilgrim off just the city of Chelsea. So now this profit is ours. It sits in a health insurance trust fund. It can only be spent on health insurance issues, and we'll continue to generate surpluses in that fund. Occasionally, when you have large surpluses, like if that fund gets over, say, $7 million or so, oh, thank you, Council. We will likely give, there's two ways we can benefit our employees by having this kind of a healthy trust fund. The first is by keeping premium costs the following year relatively low. So next year, for FY19, we're only looking at a 2.73% increase in our health insurance premiums. That's a pretty modest premium increase. There were years when we were looking at 8 or 9% increases in the city of Chelsea. So that's a good increase, and we're able to keep it low because we've had such good experience the last 2 years. The second way we can benefit our employees with this healthy health insurance trust fund is once it reaches a certain level, like let's say it's at $7 or $8 million, we could recommend what's called a payment holiday, which is 1 month you say to employees, for this month, you're not going to pay any health insurance costs. The city's going to pick it up from their trust fund. Might cost us, $600,000, but that's going to be a benefit to having this much money in the trust fund. Give you a premium holiday. Usually cities and towns do that in December when people are always looking for more money for holiday gifts. And so their paycheck, people get a big boost in their paycheck. The family plan is, $120 a week. So when you get a payment holiday for a month, you get 4 weeks of $120 more in your paycheck. That's a good thing. So we'll probably think about doing that, if not next year, but perhaps the year after, if we continue to have this kind of good experience. But in just 21 months, we've generated a pretty healthy surplus in that health insurance trust fund. And I think that's it. Yeah, so my final comment is, we have enough reserves. We're in good shape. Certainly we can get through the next 5 years without the need for any override. But there's always pressure on us to generate new revenue, which usually means encouraging development. And so that's the conclusion. I can answer any questions that you have.
Can you bring the microphone, bring the mic down?
Insurance trust fund that we're working, that's just active employees.
No, that's retirees as well.
Retirees
Everyone's
are also
involved.
in that?
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
okay. Thank you.
Retirees are part of our system. So our system is governed by a public employee committee, which has all the unions are members, and there's a weighted vote depending upon how many union members your union has. It tends to be dominated by the teachers union because they have the most members. But the retiree has a 10% vote on that. There's one retiree representative, I think it's Joe Shefko, and he has a 10% vote on the PEC. So the PEC decide, they voted to go self-insured. They would have to vote if they wanted to do a premium holiday. The retirees are represented on that PEC with a 10% vote.
Okay,
Go ahead.
all right?
Yeah.
On the first sheet, the license on the financial forecast as of 5/8/18.
Yes.
On licenses and permits, you have a decrease this year, next year?
Yes, because we were projecting the payment from Chelsea Clock, the Fairfield project, for this fiscal year. It's still quite possible it's going to come in this fiscal year. So if it does, it's not coming in next year, and so that's why there's a gap to account for that one building permit for that one phase one of that project. It's still, the expectation is that they were pulling their building permit before June 30th. I still think that's quite possible, so that's why I'm projecting this in that fashion.
Okay, and then I was looking at, couldn't help but notice the surplus in the water enterprise fund and in the sewer enterprise fund?
Yes, that's basically the equivalent of free cash. It's free cash, it's like free cash, but they call it retained earnings in these enterprise funds.
So if that enterprise fund for the water and the sewer, both of them had a
They both have
multi-million-dollar
surpluses.
multi-million-dollar surplus,
They do. They
why
both-
did the rates go up?
Because I would never use this money to subsidize rates. It will mean a huge increase when this money is gone, because this is a cost recovery system. We set rates to recover what we need to run that system. So you could use $2.6 billion and probably keep your rates at the same level for 2 years, but the year it's gone, you're going to probably need to raise rates by 25%, because it's a full cost recovery system. And my preference, what I always recommend and always recommend the city of Revere, was raise rates every single year by a relatively modest amount. Don't do these huge increases one year and no increase the next year, because nothing angers people more than a huge one-year increase.
So the surpluses that you cite here are multi-year surpluses?
They've accumulated over the years. Now, I will tell you that we've eaten into this a little bit. So usually you would use this for projects, and we have used some of this for projects, but last year, particularly the water, I proposed a rate that I knew was not going to meet our water requirements, so we'll probably eat into some of these retained earnings, because we're likely not to collect enough money in our water to meet all of our expenses this year. But I did that because the water rate was already going up by 10%, and I didn't want to put it up higher than that. So we'll probably eat into a little of this year. We may do the same with sewer. We kept that rate just at the break-even point. So we'll eat into this a little bit this year. But, yeah, I mean, typically you would use this free cash just like you would use any other free cash. You'd use it on water and sewer projects, and we have done that. You've approved some use of this money in the last 2 years for water and sewer projects. I believe we used some of this to do the force main on 2nd Street, where we were trying to get water out of the Market Street culvert. And I think we used some of this on another project that we did. Might have been Stockton Street. But we used some of this retained earning for projects over the course of the last 2 years. Oh, we used it on Admirals Hill Pumping Station as well, the water pumping station.
Okay, the other question I had, just to straighten this out in my own head, the free cash of 33.7 was not all from last year's budget. That was some money left over from the year before?
Yes.
That went to the bottom line, as you said?
Yes.
Can you
So
give me an idea?
I'm
how
going to
much?
give you rough numbers.
That's all I
We had $34 million in free cash at the close of 16. During the course of fiscal year 17, we probably spent about $12 or $15 million in free cash, which would have dropped our number down to around $20 million. But we ended the fiscal year with $33.7 million in free cash, most of it generated by excise tax receipts. So in fiscal year 17, we estimated excise tax receipts at, I can tell you, I have it here.
6 million, I think it was.
No, it was more than that. $8 million, $8.8 million, and we collected almost $15 million in excise tax that year. So we generated a huge surplus in motor vehicle excise tax in FY17, and that generated that free cash number.
So just again, can you tell me what the free cash number was for last year only, and not adding on what was there from the year before.
I'm sorry, which year are you talking about?
Fiscal 17.
Fiscal 17, it was 33.7 million.
But that included the money from the year before.
Fiscal 16, it was 34 million even. Fiscal 17, it was 33.7. What I'm saying is that in that year, we had spent about 15 million of free cash. We still generated a lot of free cash.
And you just left the money there, you didn't put it in...
No, we didn't put it in stabilization. We kept it in free cash. About 20 million fell to the bottom line. We generated another 13 million in surplus, so we ended up with almost the same number of free cash at the close of 17. I don't know what we will end up with at the close of 18. I just don't know. Won't be a lot because you've moved a lot of money and not a lot's going to fall to the bottom line. It may be a couple of $1 million.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Palatonda?
So back to, I'll get to the health insurance afterwards. So back to the charter schools you were talking about earlier. If we didn't have the charter schools, how much money would we generate for the regular school system from the state?
If you did not have charter schools at all, oh boy, you're paying probably $14 million in charter school tuition costs. I don't have the cherry seat in front.
So would that $14 million go back into the school department?
Yes. Yes, if you didn't have charter schools, yes.
And on the health insurance you were talking about, I assume when you purchase health insurance, it goes by how healthy the employees are, or at all?
No, we're a group.
Okay.
So how these insurance companies evaluate our group is some proprietary. I have no idea how they do it. But generally, what happens, we go to our carrier, which in this case is Harvard Pilgrim. That's the carrier that the PEC wants to use. And we sort of work with them to figure out what should our rates be. As I said, for the last 2 years, we've said to them, what would you charge us if we were on a premium? And they give us a number, which tends to be high because their premium number builds in all the risks. They don't want to end up in a deficit. So on a premium customer, they're setting a high rate because they're absorbing all the risk, and they don't want to end up in a deficit. So premium rates tend to be high. We've said to them, what would you charge us if we were on a premium? And for these 2 years, we applied that rate. Next year, we'll say to them, we'll work with them. We have a consultant that we hire that works for us. They confer with Harvard Pilgrim, and they try to come up with what's a reasonable rate. We'll know what their premium rate would be. We're likely not to charge that, and we'll say, okay, what should we be charging? What's reasonable given our experience the last 3 years with our group? And we'll come up with a rate. It's usually something that our consultant will recommend to us based upon that company's experience in setting rates. There's about 3 companies in Massachusetts that work with municipalities in this field. We work with a company called Cook & Company. There's a couple of other competitors to Cook & Company. They are retained by municipalities to help them set rates because most large municipalities are self-insured. They're not on premium.
Do we only offer the employees Harvard Pilgrim, or do they have other options?
That's all we offer our employees. So we interviewed Blue Cross, and we might have interviewed one other carrier, and the PEC wanted Harvard Pilgrim, and neither carrier would come with us if there was going to be another carrier. Both wanted the whole group or none at all. And so they both had that as a condition, and so the PEC ended up choosing Harvard Pilgrim. This is really one of these things where everyone's a creature of habit. Everyone here has had Harvard Pilgrim. There's really not a lot of difference between Harvard Pilgrim and Blue Cross. They all cover the same doctors, the same hospitals, but people are used to Harvard Pilgrim. Change is difficult for most people, so the PEC just said, let's stick with Harvard Pilgrim.
Yeah, the only reason why I asked, I mean, we can't compare Cambridge to Chelsea, but because Cambridge has a lot more money, but they have 3 different companies. They have Harvard Program, they have Blue Cross, and they have Tufts, and they give the employees a choice which way they want to choose at which rate they can get. So I just figured if we had different companies, maybe the employees say, well, I want the lower end, I want the higher end. I don't know.
I wanted to try to give that kind of choice, but neither company would accept us without being the exclusive carrier. Revere was similar. We had both Harvard Pilgrim and Blue Cross, but for whatever reason, as they come into new communities, they are not willing to do that. They want the whole group or none at all. Some of these are vestiges of long-term relationships, like I'm sure Cambridge has had and Revere had. So, but I don't think coming in new, which is what the carriers were coming in here at, they made it clear they would not take us unless they had the whole group.
Okay, thanks, Tom.
Earlier you spoke about the Water Enterprise Fund and that we had to raise it 10%, right? So there's a new budget in June when it comes up, right? FY 19, right? Are we going to increase that water rate from 10% or higher? What
I
is
would
your
expect the
estimation?
same kind of increases, particularly because the MWRA charges to the city went up so dramatically, and you can see that in your budget. You can
So
see
what do
the
you how much do you think you would,
I
another 10%?
I would think around 10% for both, yes. Same with trash, because you're not recovering enough to cover your trash costs at all. You're really subsidizing your trash costs, so that's another one that will go up.
What, the trash?
Trash, yes. You're not even coming close. You don't have a trash enterprise system, so you pay for trash. The charges in your trash are built into your tax rate, but your current trash rate does not come anywhere near close to covering your trash costs.
Really?
Yes.
What if
You're recovering about 1.7, 1.8 million in trash fees. Your trash costs are probably $2.4 million.
So we making up the difference now?
Your taxpayers are making up the difference. Your tax rate is covering the cost of your trash fee. You don't have an enterprise system for trash. I'm just telling you, your trash rates as they currently exist do not generate anywhere near what is required to pay for your true cost of trash collection and trash disposal.
So do you foresee that we're going to increase the trash fee?
Yes, I would foresee probably another 10% increase there.
Thank you.
Any members of the school committee have questions? Councilor Moronsky? Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see you. I'm sorry. Councilor Robinson?
Well, I just want to touch upon, I know our budgets have been very good over the last few years, and I'm sure this one will be on target. One of my concerns is that we're moving a lot of cash around, and I'm concerned what effect that'll have on our bond rating.
It should have none as long as you're keeping money in reserve. So for a bond rating agency, they see no distinction between free cash and stabilization funds. It's all reserve. So when you move $20 million from free cash to $20 million in stabilization, that's all reserve money to the bond rating agencies and anyone else looking on your books. So it has no impact on what people look at. It's money in reserve.
And my other concern, you and I touched on this a little bit, is my concern that Northeast is looking at building a brand new school. And
Yeah,
what effect that's going to have on our budget.
Yeah, we touched on this a little last year. Northeast Regional is looking to build a new, very expensive high school, $200 million high school. Mm-hmm. The way the statutory system is set up, you're going to have no choice. Mm-hmm. You cannot, yes, you can vote against it, but the way that system is, I'll use the term rigged. Yeah. You aren't, at the end of the day, you're going to pay for it. Right. So, if they do that, there'll be a huge bill presented to the city of Chelsea, which you'll have no recourse other than to pay it. Right. And Chelsea will be assessed a large portion of that because we have a lot of students in that school. I think more than just about any other community.
We do, we have more than any other community.
So we will be hit with a big bill if they get approval from the state to build that high school, and eventually they will.
You done?
That's it, thank you.
Good for you,
Okay.
Councilor Brown?
So I had a question regarding the disadvantaged economically challenged students, where on the slide that you showed that potentially we could have in excess of 1,800 students in that category.
Well, in fiscal year 16, we had 5,833 students who were identified as economically disadvantaged. We dropped the following year to 4,100, roughly. And that was not, as I said, we didn't lift those children out of poverty. They just weren't counted correctly. The state has done some better counting within their own database systems to catch everyone in their databases. So now we're up to 5,000 economically disadvantaged students. I mean, it's obvious to everyone, Mary, me, anyone that pays attention, that we have more than 5,000 disadvantaged students, economically disadvantaged students in our system. We are probably close to 6,000, and so we're not counting everyone that is economically disadvantaged, and it has a huge impact because that's $4,100 a student. Just do that multiplication. If we're short 1,000 students and we're getting $4,100 a student, that's $4 million that we're not getting that we deserve.
So in the math here, it's 1,800 students, right?
No, this year we counted exactly 5,000 economic. That's not our estimate. That's the
Okay.
real number that's been counted. 5,000 economic. So we may be short 800 if we had the same number we had in fiscal year 16.
So you said earlier, you know, with the DTA and the Mass Health and trying to subsidize that number with the state's number, if the state could get a better number, that you would be coming back to us and asking us for funding to help. You said something challenged the system, so is that potentially a lawsuit? Is that what you're speaking of?
Yeah, so that's what I was speaking about. There has been discussion, and there was an article in the Globe about a month ago that Brockton is sort of leading this charge. Brockton is really anxious to file another lawsuit against the Commonwealth because they feel that this system of education funding is unconstitutional. That was the basis for the original court challenge that started ed reform back in the early 90s. They want to do another lawsuit. And there are some people who say, based upon factors like this, the urban communities would have a good chance of proving that the current funding of education in the Commonwealth is unconstitutional. We're hoping that the state is going to try to remedy this. I have to say that the threat of a lawsuit has got some people rattled in the governor's office. So they may be looking to, Mary knows this stuff off like the top of her head. If you want to say something,
I was going to ask.
she knows this way better than I do.
Good evening. Yes, so there is certainly the threat of the lawsuit, and it has, as Tom mentioned, it's got many of our legislators nervous, which is not a bad thing because it's giving us leverage. And so there are a couple of things that we are discussing as the urban superintendents, but this is also hitting the rural districts, including also what we call the urban-like districts. So we have this ring of districts who are becoming more and more like urban districts, such as, for example, Dennis Yarmouth had to lay off 35 teachers this year to close their budget gap. We had Southbridge that had to lay off 40 teachers. By the way, last night, Everett Public Schools had a cut of 90 positions, 67 teachers. They have a $5 million gap. This is a broken foundation budget. And so these are variables that you see in this overarching formula. Okay, so these are low income is one of those variables, and this is just illustrative of the broken formula overall. So we are underfunded. If for example, charter schools, Tom mentioned the charter school piece. If we were funded according to the way the law is written, we should be funded at 100% reimbursement. Last year, we were funded at 52% reimbursement. This year, we're funded at 47% reimbursement. So that's 47 cents on a dollar. You keep looking at each one of these variables, and you start to add up how much are you underfunded. Chelsea alone is underfunded according to the formula. If we were to get everything we're supposed to, as the formula was written, we should be getting an additional $17 million. $17 million this year. So, and we are not the only ones. This is also what you're seeing is districts are facing this cumulatively. It's year after year. Last year I had a $2.7 million budget gap. The year before, this is cumulative. So we're holding on by a hair's breadth. You know, it's difficult and it's demoralizing that our state is not valuing education and putting the money into education where they should be putting the money into education. So with that said, I think I forgot the original question. Sorry.
No, you brought some points up, but in the event that we don't get this correct count or this formula is unfair to us and there is a lawsuit and we lose this lawsuit, will we be thinking about layoffs? Is that what would happen
We're already
next?
laying off. We've been laying off for the last 3 years. We've been cutting positions and increasing class sizes, and we're in our third year of really. We're going. The way I put it is, you know, we started cutting the
$17 million
and now we're cutting the bone marrow.
Much sufficient. I mean, more. What's the word? It's more strenuous than just $2.7 million. I would think if you counted on $17 million because of this formula, and we don't have that $17 million coming in because of the unfairness of this formula, then you would have to be laying off, as I would think, Everett, anywhere from a certain amount to
right.
a great amount.
So we've already gone through our budget process. We've done some very painful cuts, some very painful public hearing. If we want to talk about solutions, number one is the lawsuit. So we're talking about the Hancock decision from 1993, which gave us education reform. And so we're looking to actually do another lawsuit. That is making some of the legislators very nervous because they don't want a lawsuit. So the other solution is Senate Bill 2325, which will be debated Thursday, May 10th, in the Senate chambers. And so we do anticipate, from what we're hearing, it's going to go through the Senate very easily, and it will be approved, but then it goes to the House Ways and Means. And for some reason, the House is the more difficult lift. And the question is, it needs to come through the House Ways and Means by July 20th, and really it needs to come through without being watered down as a fix to the formula, and it's a 7-year incremental fix, so we think it's fair. But we also know that this is also it's a quicker measure than a lawsuit. The Hancock decision took 15 years. I'm not up for 15 years of a lawsuit. The Senate 2325 is a 7-year incremental fix. We'd start to get our increases and our fixes on some of these variables on the formula as soon as next year. And then the third proposal that is being discussed amongst the urban superintendents is to go to a ballot initiative. So we are determined we cannot live like this anymore. We are constantly seeing money being given by our leaders, our governor and others on initiatives such as the charter schools, initiatives such as, and nothing against the charter schools, they deserve their money, but if I, in the law, say that I get 100% reimbursement, then give me my 100%, not 47 cents on the dollar. And so certainly, that as well as the increase in vocational schools and the funding for the vocational schools and for their rebuilding. Those are the things that are hurting because the money is being diverted there instead of fixing that foundation budget.
All right, I just got one other question, and this is off from that. So the Silver Line is up and running, and I catch the commuter rail, and I noticed over on what we call Bellingham Stop, or Bellingham Square Stop, which is at the corner of Arlington and Hurd, Arlington and 6th. I've noticed a lot of traffic. I've noticed a lot of confusion, and my question is, have you hired anyone additional to help with the kids? Because the issue I'm thinking about here is safety. With the kids, have the MBTA provide? I know they have just the guys with the jackets, but I believe those are just for signal guards for the Silver Line. But now you have the Silver Line, you have the detour coming off Everett Ave, coming down Arlington Street, cutting across 6th Street. Have you hired anyone else, or have the
We do have a
Department of
crossing guard at
Transportation?
where the Silver Line is crossed,
How many do you have there?
I don't know offhand. We definitely have at least one. Is it two?
Yeah,
Okay, is
it was
two?
2 there before the Silver Line started, though.
Right. So
So-
in terms of hiring anyone additional at this point, no, we have not. So we do have the two. I will say that we also have Transit Authority, and they have been helping us with the students. However, full disclosure, they did come into Chelsea High 2 weeks ago and said that some of our students were not quite as respectful to our crossing guards as they should be. So we have invited
Meaning,
the trans
can you give us an example what they meant?
mouthing off.
It's not
and
walking across?
Basically continuing to walk
Okay.
even though, the vehicles are coming. So we have invited the Transit Authority to come in. They have a curriculum and a program to educate our students on the dangers. But unfortunately, as you know and I know, teenagers feel that they're immortal, and that's the real danger there, yes.
So the reason why just this last part
Because
is
I think we're trailing off a little and we still have to.
well,
put out
it's
our
important
questions.
because it's public safety and it's part
No,
of
I
the school
agree, but
public-
we're talking about the CIP.
Yeah. But I thought I noticed one of the school personnel's down there this week.
We have some of our school personnel, after the Transit Authority came in and told us that our students were not quite as respectful as we wanted
And that purpose,
to help. So it was Assistant Principal Ron Schmidt, and so, basically to make sure that the students were obeying and listening, and the students listen to Mr. Schmidt.
okay, thank you.
Yeah. I just have a couple of quick questions for the city manager, and then School Committee Member Moronsky, if you can go up to that podium after so you can ask your question. I know that Councilor Robinson asked about our bond rating and the effect that it could have on us moving money around. But I had the reverse question. By us putting money into the stabilization fund, can't that actually improve our bond rating?
We have plenty of reserves. Our bond rating, there are some inherent issues that prevent us from Standard & Poor's giving us an additional increase beyond AA. We've advocated to them that we deserve the next step, which I think is AA+, but we haven't been able to convince them. And a lot of it has to do with things we can't control, like the median income of the city's residents. So until things like that change and get boosted up, there are limitations as to how high they will give a city in terms of the way they think about their bond ratings. Again, a lot of this is they have this proprietary way in which they evaluate municipalities, and we've been told that that's what's holding us back at this point. And that's not anything the city can really control, the median income of its residents.
Okay. Secondly,
So it's not reserves that are holding us back.
Got it.
We could
Also-
have 100 million in reserves, and they probably would still keep us at this level until some other things were to change.
I said a couple of minutes ago that we're talking about the CIP, and we're not. We're talking about the 5-year financial forecast. So I just wanted to correct myself. You said something earlier, and I just wanted to make sure that I heard it right. You said a third of our aid goes to educate 8%?
Yes, so
Is that what you said?
I'm using these figures. Chapter 70 increased by 3.2 million. Our charter school, our net cost for charter schools ate up 1.2 million of that $3.2 million. So that 1.2 million is roughly
More or
a
less.
third of 3.2 million. So of the money the state is giving to the city, it's taking back a third of it and giving it to the charter schools that educate our students. But charter schools only educate a total of 8% of the total Chelsea public school.
8%.
8.
8, okay. I just
But
wanted
they're
to make
getting
sure I
a
heard it right.
third of our Chapter 70 money.
Got it.
That's my problem with this system.
Got it.
And these percentages are even worse in other communities. But in Chelsea, 8% of our students are taking a third of our funding from the state.
Okay, and then the last,
Third of the increase, yes.
okay.
And the 3.2 million.
A
So they're
third
really
of our
not eight-
increase in funding goes to educate 8%.
But they're still taking much more than 8% of our total funding. The charter schools are still taking, if we looked at total Chapter 70 funding, the charter schools are still eating up far more than 8%.
What is the total Chapter 70 funding?
I think, and
And
our
what is the
total
to-
Chapter 70 is what? I can tell you what that is. $76 million. Hold on, let me just double check that number.
That's about a fifth.
76
So it's
million.
about a fifth.
Is the total Chapter 70 funding? And what's the total cost of the charter school?
14.6 million.
Okay, so
That's almost 20% of our funding is going to educate 8% of our students.
Okay. I know that Councilor Robinson has another question, and as well as Recupero and Moronsky, but I just wanted, because you guys already spoke, I do want to make sure that everyone gets an opportunity to speak first. I do have one final point. In this presentation, I didn't hear you mention anything about recreational marijuana coming to the city, and I'm wondering if you anticipate on that contributing in a positive way?
It will certainly generate some revenues for us, but I have no way of estimating how significant that's going to be because I really don't have any sense as to the extent of that industry coming to Chelsea. We've certainly had a lot of interest. In fact, next week there's a community hearing for the company that wants to go in at 80 Everett Avenue. And it could be not an insignificant amount of money, but I have no way of estimating that, and it is not built into any of my numbers.
Got it. Thank you. Mr. Moronsky?
You talked about the charter schools. What else wasn't mentioned is the special needs schools and the busing that we send these kids to all over the state. And it's not just a city problem, Chelsea. It's a state problem. And I don't know, somewhere along the line, I don't know, I know it's a law that these kids have a right to go to these schools, whatever, and I'm not objecting about that. I'm just saying, you know, to send a kid, I drive kids to school. One kid that goes to one special needs school is $52,000 a year. And it's another $2,700 a month to bus them there. It's taken $15 million out of our budget a year, you know. That's a good amount of money. And, you know, if you go to Harvard, Harvard's probably cheaper than it is for one of these kids to go to these schools, you know. So something's got to be changed in the formula. Massachusetts is a very wealthy state. The city of Chelsea is not, you know. Another thing, too, is I like to talk about the pension system, you know. If you worked in the private corporations, they pay into Social Security. And the Social Security you get, I believe max is like $2,700 you can get for a month. The pension system is way out of whack. And it needs to change, you know. And if it doesn't change, 2 years ago, we were $68 million underfunded. Now we're $81 million underfunded, all right? I've been talking about this for years. And I don't hear anybody in the council or anybody in the state wanting to change it. But, I talked to Tom, last year about it, and the state politicians don't want to change it. It's going to keep on going up and up and up. You got people retiring at 57 years old making $100,000. And by the time they're 75 years old, they've made more money in retirement than they did when they work. It's a serious problem. And it's not just in Chelsea. It's all across the state, and it's all across this country. California, there was one city in California that broke away, I think, from their California pension system, and they reduced it. The employees agreed to it, and they're the only state, I think, city in California that is fully secured. But anyways, that's what I'd like to, talk about. And one other thing, too, that the Silver Line, I don't know if you see a problem coming in, but I see a problem with parking on the streets. People jumping on the Silver Line and parking on public streets. So I hope you take that in consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, school committee member. Mr. Moronsky, do you have anything you want to say about that? There wasn't really a question, it was just some comments.
All of these pension laws are state laws. The city doesn't have any control over any of that. Anyone comes into our system, they're governed by state pension laws.
Okay. Is there anybody that didn't speak that has something to say? All right, so Councilor Recupero and then Councilor Robinson, please keep it brief.
I have one question. As a city grows, the population is growing, right? So as the population is growing, do you foresee hiring more teachers and increasing the budget of the school by hiring more teachers? How is this? Is the current teachers we have enough for all of them? Or do you foresee to increase and hire more teachers?
That's a question that only Mary can answer.
So under the law, students enter our school system, we need to educate them. When we get to a certain point in a classroom or a grade level or an age bracket where we have sufficient numbers of students to increase the teacher at that grade level, then we would do so. Excuse me. Right now, the formula at the state level provides for, I think they average that it should be one teacher for 17 or 18 students. We're actually, in most of our classes, we're anywhere from 27 to 30 students. So if in answer to your question, it's a formula. We have to make sure, because students just don't come into us all third graders. They, it might be one third grader, 2 fourth graders, 1 12th grader. Well, you wouldn't hire another teacher just for 1 12th grader. You have to have a critical number in order to put the teacher in. However, I will say our special populations have to have support services, such as English language learners need to have an ESL teacher, or special education students need to have special education teachers. So the more complex student learner that we receive, the more we have to hire teachers for those support services.
So you foresee to hire some more of those type of teachers where the needs arises?
Yes.
As the need arises, yes, we would have to shift our budget to prioritize and hire for those student populations.
Thank you. Councilor Robinson?
Pretty much is to Mary. If you can clarify to this council, the money that goes to the charter school, they're not held to the same standard as we do. In our budget, we have to spend the money by the end of the year, and the charter schools are able to get a little sludge fund, and that's why we see them building all these brand-new schools on the backs of the monies that we're not being reimbursed by.
So you did a beautiful explanation, but I'll just add on to it that absolutely, we are under the requirement that our $74 million that we receive from the state for the state aid, we have to spend it by June 30th every year. And if we don't, we get slammed by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. So they end up, citing us for poor budgeting, for not doing what we're supposed to do within that 10-month period of the school year. Charter schools are not under that requirement. Charter schools have a lot of flexibilities that we do not have in public education, and that's part of the angst with charter schools. At the same time, I will say that in Chelsea, we tried to build bridges with our charter schools. However, they're not held to we have to hire licensed teachers, licensed by the Department of Education, licensed administrators, licensed by the Department of Education. They do not have to hire licensed teachers or licensed administrators. They do not have, collective bargaining and union requirements that they have to fulfill. There are so many differences that make the charter school world and the public school world very different. The reporting requirements, even for me as a superintendent, are not the same in terms of the transparency on the charter school piece. They do not have to answer to a school committee. They're pretty much, they run their own building and school, so.
Councilor Pelotonda?
Just one quick question, Mary.
You do know my hearing is next week, right?
I'm sorry.
That's okay, I'm teasing.
I know we all deserve an education, and the kids do as well to go wherever they want in the Chelsea realm, whatever. But do we have to send the kids to a charter school? Can we just abolish that and just say, hey, if you want to go to school in Chelsea, you have to go to this high school, this grammar school, this elementary school? Do we have to have a charter school?
We do not send them to the charter schools. It's voluntary on the parent part to apply and put their child's name into the lottery, and it's based on the lottery that the child's name gets pulled. The charter then goes back and asks the parent, do you want to attend? And the parent will say yes or no.
But does Chelsea have to pay for that?
Yes, if the parent says yes, the child goes to the charter, and then our per pupil rate, according to Chapter 70, now needs to go to that charter school.
So under the chapters, we can't say no to them. We're not going to fund them to go there, correct?
Oh, we cannot say no.
That was a lot more than one question.
Okay. I'm sorry. I'm done.
Oh,
Mary.
okay.
Thank you.
I think we're done, Mr. Ambrosino. Do you have any final remarks or anything?
Nope, that's it.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody, for coming here. See no further business before us. We are adjourned.